In 1985, the New York Times published an article called Andover's Opening to China Studies about the Harbin Institute of Technology and their educational exchange with Phillips Academy. But this was not the first time Chinese students had come to study at Andover, nor the first time their coming had been formally documented.
The history of Chinese students at Andover is particularly unique. We really do not have material in the archives relating to other ethnic groups on the scale that we do for Chinese students.
Dr. Roberts approached me about this archive, and it was the first time I had gotten to know about this robust set of archives and documents. I just instinctively, I thought we need to digitize the rest, and then we should teach about this archive.
One such student in the archives was Frank Lin, class of 1923.
I feel like the correspondence really kind of brings people to life. Someone like Frank Lin, where you can see him on his first day at MIT being really stressed out, and it just feels so alive.
Following Lin, many more generations of international students from China and other Asian countries would continue making memories at Phillips Academy.
I was the first person in my family to study abroad in the US at a boarding school, so we had no idea which were kind of good schools or which were bad schools. A family friend of ours wrote down like 6 or 7 boarding schools on a piece of napkin while we were having lunch. The deal that I made with my parents was that if I were to get accepted in any of those schools, then I would get the opportunity to study in the US. If not, then I would have finished my studies in Korea.
I came here because it has become an increasingly become a choice for Chinese students to go abroad, and increasingly at lower education levels. I chose to apply because I spoke English well, and I didn't really need to take extra classes on English like someone else would. So that really gave me a little bit of a step up. So we're like, why not?
Subsequent to arriving here at Andover was the first time that I actually interacted with Korean Americans. One of the things that I found very interesting was a different sense of identity of being a Korean that I had as a Korean from Korea versus the vision of the definition of what a Korean identity means from the perspective of a Korean American.
If you think Asian American, all the international Asians are not really necessarily part of that group. And by this, I mean they didn't grow up necessarily with Hannah Montana or all the childhood classics. I never grew up watching SpongeBob or the Powerpuff Girls and the other things that I can't name. Maybe they don't celebrate things and have the same childhoods and memories, the collective memory that is part of being Asian American, and especially the kind of activism and awareness of identity and discrimination that Asian Americans have. That's not built in for international Asians.
One thing that I always question is, how do we treat Asians and Asian Americans in this school? What are the issues involved with Asians and Asian Americans? And part of the answer to that question has been that there have been a lot of silences and gaps. It seems as if, by and large, the students at this time had a pretty amazing experience. That being said, we know that it wasn't all peaches and roses, and we know that there was probably a little bit of tension, but it's not something that's necessarily reflected in the archive, which is an interesting thing because that shows that it's a partial record, and that's why we need to delve further and think further about how to read these archives in a more holistic sense.
While there are rarely mentions of racism or discrimination in Lin's records, the Chinese student conferences might have provided a space for Asian students to express their own feelings, had they experienced them, of discomfort or pain. If not traveling to these conferences, Lin was traveling during the summer and winter holidays. He writes to Stearns on December 16, 1922, "My Christmas vacation will begin on the 21st of this month, but I cannot say definitively when I can come to Andover. Probably I can leave here on 22nd.
I am fortunate enough to be able to go home pretty often, and when I go back home, I usually get in touch with my friends back home.
I think homesickness wasn't something that afflicted me that much while I was here. But I think I was just too busy just socializing.
I don't think I necessarily missed home that much because I think most of the problems that I dealt with here was kind of like, it's not going to get better once I get home. So I didn't miss home in that sense. I didn't want to go home. And I think I was so focused on everything that was happening here that I really did not miss home until, say, like last year. I do actually sometimes write letters to a friend of mine, so I know like the kind of anticipation that it takes. Even in this age where you can literally text, it still is like the amount of unknown that goes with a letter, and because you have to send letters over long distances, I can really resonate with the amount of distance they had with their home. I can still imagine that they probably didn't talk as much as they would want to. Maybe that creates estrangement between the parents and the child because of long periods of not contacting and not being together. And I think that's something that's a common experience, I think.
So in some ways it feels like both very personal and yet also a bit impersonal. In some ways it can be hard to get a sense of what was it like to be one of those students here.
Nostalgia is really thinking, oh, it's a longing for the past. If you don't know anything about that past of Asian students here, how do you long for something? So I think part of the memory work that we're doing is really recounting these records of Asian or Chinese students here, and thinking through what they experience and just trying to have a holistic, open, and empathetic kind of understanding. Not necessarily based on how we feel as Asians or Asian Americans at this school, but really thinking about the context in which they lived and being able to place that context into reading those archives. I think that's really important from a historical standpoint.
In some ways, I'd like to think the collective memory of this institution would be just richer, if nothing else, more nuanced, more complicated.
The study and in-depth synthesis of Phillips Academy's Chinese student archives has begun giving a voice to the silent microhistories stored in these documents. By researching the generations that came before them and their memories, current Asian and Asian American students are revolutionizing the collective memory of our past.